First, I should thank OCA Wisconsin for co-hosting this evening. Lorna, would you like to say a word or two about it?
When you're a friend of Daniel, you get invited to speak in front of a group of people.
First, I should thank OCA Wisconsin for co-hosting this evening. Lorna, would you like to say a word or two about it?
When you're a friend of Daniel, you get invited to speak in front of a group of people about books that you love. So I'm very lucky that OCA Wisconsin can help co-sponsor this event. OCA, if you've never heard of it, stands for Organization of Chinese Americans and has been around as an organization on a national basis since 1973. And the local chapter here has been around since 1980. And we're here for promoting civil engagement, for promoting social justice, and also our culture. And what better culture is there than food? I have my own personal story. I'm actually sort of third generation, if you count the generation that comes to this country as the first. My father and mother's family came here in the early 1900s, which is when I realized the history of the United States with the Chinese Exclusion Act being 1882. For my grandparents to have been here in the early 1900s was actually quite miraculous. But my dad was born in Philadelphia. My mom was born in San Francisco, and here I am in Milwaukee. And I've been in all the Chinatowns on East Coast, West Coast. But right here in Milwaukee, we're just so happy to welcome Kevin, who is a current resident in Chicago. And just one other thing is whenever my parents and I went traveling anywhere, whether it's Europe or in the U.S., we always had to find the local Chinese restaurant because that was our comfort food. So just want to welcome you.
Lorna, thanks so much. A couple more things. Before I forget, let me tell you that, importantly, today is day 5,353 that Boswell's been here and been in business. Thank you. And we're thrilled to spend it with these two. So tonight, of course, our conversationalist is Josh Modell of Talk House, formerly of the Onion AV Club, and many, many other wonderful publications. And he is here to do some conversationalizing with Kevin Pang. Thrilled to have him here. James Beard Award winner, co-host of the hit America's Test Kitchen series, Hunger Pains. For America's Test Kitchen, Kevin is also editorial director for digital and host of the podcast Proof. He's also creator of the documentary, For Grace. And we are here tonight to celebrate A Very Chinese Cookbook, 100 recipes from China and not China, but still really Chinese. Please give them both a warm welcome.
Hi, everyone. Hi. I'm from Chicago, but I just tell everyone it's South Milwaukee. That's what it is, right?
He's from Chicago. Is this on?
Terrible start.
There we go.
He's from Chicago, but he's very sorry.
I just have to say, I'm so happy to be here. I don't say this with every town, I swear, but this is legitimately one of my favorite towns because this is where my 7-year-old saw his first Major League Baseball game. Was here at it's not called Miller Park, what's it called, American Family something or another, right? And now he's a diehard Brewers fan. So there you go. I have the relatively cheaper tickets than Wrigley Field of American Family Field to thank.
I have tape of you saying that with a different baseball team in every city. I want to start by just blowing some smoke a little bit. I've known Kevin for about 10 years-ish. I knew him as the food writer or a food writer at Chicago Tribune. And we were introduced by a mutual friend when the Onion and AV Club, where I worked at the time, was trying to start a food section. And my first response was, would he really want to do that? And of course, he did, and it was great. And he has this sort of incredible pedigree that you heard a lot about, that sort of dribbed and drabbed out over the years, where like, oh, by the way, I directed this documentary called For Grace. It's on Netflix. You can watch it. Oh, really? Like, I've known you for 2 years and I'm just finding that out now. And then when we were catching up, I think it must have been early 2020, Kevin, what are you up to? We had both left the Onion at that point. It's like, oh, like on virtually the same day, I'm starting Kellogg School of Management and a huge new job at America's Test Kitchen. So you make me feel lazy. And it honestly, it irritates me just a little bit, I have to say.
I am buying dinner for you afterwards, so at least we've got that, right?
Well, that's something.
Does it absolve you of any guilt?
Oh, I don't feel guilty.
Okay, all right,
That's fine.
great.
That's fine. So let's talk about, and then of course, you know, you're like, oh, by the way, I'm also a year later, I'm doing a web series and this book comes out. Do you sleep?
This is the last event
Okay.
we've been through to 8 different cities, just 8 different indie bookshops. And by the way, can I just thank Boswell Books because first of all, this is this Milwaukee's best bookstore by far.
By far.
And you know, and please, after this, whether you buy my book or whether you buy another book, these bookstores are the lifeblood of communities like this, and so we really need to support them. So anyway, just another plug for Boswell. Thank you to Daniel, thank you to Chris, and thank you for all of you for coming out here. But anyway, to your point, yes, I don't get to sleep that much, but after tonight, hopefully we'll get to some sleep.
We'll
again.
eat and then you can sleep on your way back to Chicago. So let's talk about the origin of this book, which is really the origin of the web series also, which starts with a forwarded email from a dad. And
yeah,
I get those, and you don't necessarily want to open them right away.
Do any of you get these emails from either relatives, older relatives, perhaps parents, perhaps from aunts and uncles, and it just says forward? And my dad's name is Jeffrey Pang. Forward, Jeffrey Pang sent you an email from YouTube, no less. And of course, the first thing I do is I delete it because I'm thinking, oh, Dad's on his reading about some conspiracy theory again, right?
Oh, is that true of your dad?
Well, no. I mean, that's what I thought. But when someone emails, when your father forwards you from YouTube, you're like, I'm not going to watch this, right? And then the story is that a few weeks later, my mom called me up and said, hey, Kevin, did you see this video that your dad sent? And I'm like, no, I deleted it. And she said, you should watch this. So I clicked it open. And the first thing I see were my mom's hands, because I can recognize her wedding band. And then I heard this very cheesy kind of royalty-free music that you can get for free online. And it was very lo-fi. And then I saw a photo of my mom and my grandma, and then they were making Shanghai scallion pancakes. And I'm thinking, what is going on here? And it turns out that my dad started his own YouTube cooking channel, unbeknownst to me. And this was in 2012, and it had something like 50,000 views. Yeah. And the crazy thing is that he would keep making these videos once a month. And now some of these videos have more than 500,000 views.
And he didn't, even though you're a food writer already at that point, he didn't call and say, oh, by the way,
No. And this was my world. I was into digital media. And my then 65-year-old dad, who was making movies on Windows Movie Maker with royalty-free music, was outpacing me 10x what I could have done. And I was just I didn't know what's going on. So what he told me, I should give some context as to why these YouTube videos happen. Okay. So I immigrated to North America when I was 6 or 7 years old, to Canada first, and then I moved to the US when I was 11. And when I would go to school, I would get these, and I'm sure there's a number of folks who I see who are immigrants as well, who could relate. You would have friends say, why do you dress like this? Or why does your lunch smell like that? I mean, it's sort of classic immigrant experience, right? And so what I would try to do is I wanted to fit in. I needed to be American to assimilate myself into the culture, okay? And meanwhile, my parents, who are very proudly, stoically Chinese, wanted to maintain that heritage. And so what happens when you have someone trying to be really American and someone who's trying to keep you really Chinese under one roof? You get a lot of, acrimony, a lot of fisticuffs, right? And so my parents and I would, and specifically my dad, would fight all the time, just all the time, about nonsense, about nothing at all, just get into these arguments. And then what was worse was that at some point I decided I was going to stop speaking Chinese at home, right? Which is not good news. I think it was me being recalcitrant, being kind of a teenage, rebel. And so his English is not the best. My Chinese wasn't the best. And so when you have someone speaking English and who can only understand maybe like 40% of what you're saying, a lot of miscommunication. So that exacerbated any sort of acrimony. Okay. Sure. Okay. So fast forward to when I became a food writer at the Chicago Tribune. That was the first time, Josh, that I actually would call up my dad. And instead of having 2-minute conversations about, oh, how's the weather? What are you buying? What are you eating tonight? Right. Yep. Like it was always the same 2-minute phone call. Now I was asking him about, how do you make this dish? And then we would soon have these long 45-minute conversations about food. And he would be speaking and describing food as if he was James Joyce. You're writing double unders. He would talk about how the shumai, which is the dumpling, it should, and I quote, the wrapper should caress the filling like the petals of a flower, like a prongs on a diamond ring. I'm like, who is this man speaking so poetically about Chinese food, right? Yeah. And I've never heard him speak about that before. No. So that's when and that was the time that he started doing this YouTube channel. And I do want to read a little bit, just really quickly from the top here, because the code of this is that I wrote an essay about this in the New York Times Magazine in 2016, and it sort of, and I'm going to read the last 3 paragraphs of this, and it will sort of explain why he decided to do these videos. So, okay, so he says, or I say, why? I asked during one of our weekly phone conversations, do you want a show on the Food Network or something? You really want to know? My dad asked in Chinese. Your mom's great-grandmother used to cook amazing Shanghainese food for her. She would dream about it. But when your mom was finally old enough to ask for the recipes, her great-grandmother had already developed dementia. She couldn't even remember cooking those dishes. The only thing your mom had left was the memory of her taste. We're afraid that if you wanted to eat your childhood dishes and one day we're both no longer around, you wouldn't know how to cook it. You know, he added, you can be pretty uncommunicative. Neither of us is likely to have the courage to sit down and hash out years of father-son strife. We're both too stubborn, and verbalizing our emotions would leave us squirming. I even waited until the last minute to send him a draft of this story and waited nervously for the response. But soon enough, a reply arrived. It read, "Hi, Kevin. This is a good and true story. Thank you. Call me sometime, Dad."
And several weeks later, you called him.
And that's how this came to be, is these videos. It began as one deleted, forwarded email, and then 11 years later, it becomes this really improbable, crazy book. So anyway, there you go.
And where in this timeline is Hunger Pangs? And I'm super curious about how you get your dad, you guys should watch these videos. You don't see Jeffrey's face ever. You don't hear his voice. He's completely invisible. It's just this silly music.
Yeah. And my mom's hands. Yeah.
And your mom's hands.
Right.
And then recipes kind of appear on the screen. And everything looks amazing.
Yeah.
But it's not like he was angling to be a star.
No, he said that he didn't want to speak English because his English is not the best, right? And so that was just his video. Hunger Pangs is when I joined America's Test Kitchen, that was when I joined in 2020, I said to him, "Hey, Dad, would you like to be in a cooking show with me?" And he said, "You're kidding, right?" And it was about 7 seconds of silence, and I said, "No, I'm actually quite serious." And also, because if your last name is Pang and you work in food media and you don't call it Hunger Pangs, it just feels like you're leaving a lot on the table.
Definitely. I mean, it is a dad joke you can make with your dad.
Yes. And we both love dad jokes,
And so where does the idea for the book come in? What's the genesis of this thing we're looking at here?
So I'm just curious, any of you watch America's Test Kitchen or like watch on PBS, first of all, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. We're on PBS. We also have a show called Cook's Country. We got a number of books sitting right there in the cooking section. Please pick up a few too. But at America's Test Kitchen, and we're based out in Boston. I do live in Chicago / South Milwaukee. And we operate like, we call it Test Kitchen because we're famously rigorous to the point of like people think we're crazy, right?
It is.
Every recipe on average costs $11,000 to develop.
Bananas.
Just one recipe, right? And some are less, some are way more. We've had recipes that took us 2 years to develop and 500 pounds of beef. That's our Texas beef brisket recipe. And so we've never done, in our 30 years of existence, we've never done a book that is based on Asian cookery before, right?
Is that right?
And so, no, which is very surprising. And so when I joined, they thought, you know what, would you be interested to do this book? And I jumped at the chance because it was really an opportunity to do it in a way that I'd be really proud of. I'd be really happy to really sort of, maintain, be really faithful to the food. But at the same time, we didn't want to do just the Chinese food I grew up with because I will tell you that when I was very young too, the Chinese food that my friends would eat it was as if we lived in a parallel universe because I would grow up eating winter melon soup or radish cake or these shrimp wontons. And my friends in Seattle, where I grew up, would have things like orange chicken or, kung pao chicken or crab rangoon. And I've never heard of those dishes, right? And when I learned about those dishes, I thought, you know what? And this is the 16-year-old to me, right? I thought, this ain't real Chinese food. This is not authentic. And I use the quote in quotes, right? But then the realization came, and I'll tell a story later on too. You'll understand why this is set up here in a moment here. But I realized that at some point I tried orange chicken at Panda Express for the first time, and I was in college, and I thought, oh my God, this is amazing. This is so delicious, right? And the realization came that if I were growing up in Hong Kong, the Chinese food that I would recognize and would call authentic would be completely different from the Chinese food that someone who grew up in Beijing would call Chinese food, that someone who grew up in Shanghai would call Chinese food, and that someone who grew up in Milwaukee or Detroit or Chicago would call Chinese food, right? And so there's American Chinese food. There is Peruvian Chinese food. There's Indian Chinese food. So it's it was really the realization that Chinese food was a big tent, cuisine, right? Yeah. And also I'm very happy to say that the word authentic does not appear once in the entire book, because authenticity is really, it's from the perspective of the person. If you grew up in Detroit, there's a very famous dish in Detroit called ABC. Anyone from Detroit? Do you know what ABC is? Apple blue, close. Almond boneless chicken. All right. So there's a dish that's really famous in Detroit called almond boneless chicken. And if you grew up in Detroit, you probably had that dish many, many times, but that is authentic to you. So really, I think authenticity is a bit of a loaded word. And what we just wanted to do is we wanted to celebrate Chinese food, to say that it can be many things to many people. We want to convince people that it is easier to make than you could have ever imagined, right? In the book, every recipe is on a 1 to 4 difficulty scale. So you can just look at the ones that says, 1 difficulty. And in fact, some of the most delicious recipes, I think, are the level 1 recipes. But I think, to answer your question, like what we wanted the book to be is we wanted it to be accessible. We wanted it to be sort of a celebration of food. We want you to try cooking it because we think it's going to be way easier and way more delicious than you think.
And you have all of these expert America's Test Kitchen folks helping out. Now, were you guys sort of the final arbiter of every taste in the book?
My parents would fly in once a month.
Amazing.
For a week at a time. And my parents had expectations too, and I had expectations. I'm thinking, okay, you get a bunch of like test cooks in Boston who are making these, Chinese food. Originally I thought, this could be like 70 or 80% of like what I thought it could be, right? Yeah. And the amazing thing, and I swear to you, I'm not being hyperbolic, is that my parents said that they were able to basically lift certain restaurants from Hong Kong, from Richmond, BC, from San Francisco that they've tasted from Shanghai, and plopped it right down on 21 Dry Dock Avenue in Boston, meaning that the dishes that they tasted it evokes some sort of like emotional nostalgia.
Yeah.
And because we do test these dishes 50, 60 times before we publish it, it was, it tasted exactly like the food that we grew up eating. So every single dish we tasted, we tried, and we cooked through. And, no joke, we would not publish a recipe if we didn't have our blessing, I suppose.
Yeah. Well, that must have been kind of an emotional family moment too, because you talk a lot in the book, and you talked here already about fighting with your dad, but this really sort of brought you together in a
the most amazing thing is that in the 2 years that we worked on this book, we did not fight once. I mean, that's pretty amazing. I mean, it's a really good streak.
Not even about a recipe?
Not even about a recipe, because, I think the other thing too is that you realize that when you work so closely with relatives and with your parents, you realize that they are way smarter than you could have thought. And then conversely, they thought that I'm way smarter than they could have imagined. So I think there's like a lot of, we probably did not give each other as much credit as we did growing up. And I think this book really helps sort of like, kind of elevated our standing, respectively.
Yeah. Does your dad like American Chinese food?
Oh yeah.
He loves it?
Now he does.
Yeah.
Because I think it's, because we don't see it in competition, we love Mongolian beef. Anyone like Mongolian beef here?
Of course.
I mean, who does not like Mongolian beef, right? Except you don't eat beef, right? It's like it's got onions and garlic and scallions. I mean, and the soy sweet sauce. I mean, what can be better? But I think American Chinese food tend to sometimes be a little bit on the sweeter side.
Mm-hmm.
And so, we like it, but we're not going to be likely eating like an entire carton of it, right? Sure. In small doses, I think we really, really do like it.
I know we want to get to some questions here. Let me ask you quickly though, if there's one recipe in here you think people should start with, that's like easy enough and also sort of an entree, pun intended, into cooking.
Very good, Josh.
Thank you very much. I worked on that for hours. I feel like you do write in there about, I think, beef chow fun.
Yep.
Being sort of your test case for Chinese restaurants. Like you go order like the simplest thing, but it's a litmus test of whether the restaurant's going to be good. Is that one you think people should start with?
Absolutely. Well, so when I talk about beef chow fun, I worked for many years as a food critic at the Chicago Tribune, right? And I would say that if you want to understand how a restaurant operates, how a chef does, you should order his or her roast chicken. Because I think like if you can pull off a roast chicken, then that tells a lot about that chef, right? Sure. And similarly, beef chow fun, I think, is a really good litmus test of many things. What you need to learn how to, what's called velvet the beef. Basically, it makes the beef really sort of like luscious and very, very tender. You need to learn how to apply this technique. If you cook with a wok, it's called wok hay, which means that because the heat from the wok basically chars it and gives it that nice charcoal flavor, right? You need to learn about sauce work. So like that one dish does a lot to inform you how good of a chef you are. But there is one dish that I think I would recommend more than anything. Did anyone you watch TMJ for the morning blend this morning? I'm just curious on TMJ this morning. Okay, so we demonstrated a recipe on there this morning called cold sesame noodles. And that dish you can make in 15 minutes. It's the easiest thing to make, and it's my favorite dish in this whole book. Now, there's a crazy story behind it, as there are crazy stories with every recipe in this book. But I grew up in Seattle, like I said, and is anyone like from Seattle by any chance? Okay, so I grew up in a town called Kent, Washington, which is about 20 minutes south of Seattle. And there is my favorite restaurant is this place called Green Village in Kent, Washington. Mm-hmm. And they serve these cold sesame noodles with poached chicken that were so delicious. And when I would go off to college, I would plead with my dad to say, on the way back from SeaTac Airport, can we stop by Green Village and pick up some noodles, right? To the point where eventually he just bought the noodles. And as I walked into the door of our Civic, he would just give me the noodles. I would start eating. And then like 5 minutes later, I would say, oh, hi, Dad. I was such a jerk, right? But it was so good. And that there's something about that particular flavor and that sauce and like the poached chicken that I just cannot get enough of. So the last time I had it was about 10 years ago. And as I was working on this book, I wanted to see if this restaurant was still around. So I looked up Green Village online, and sadly, it doesn't exist anymore. It's a place called Green Valley, and they serve Chinese / poke bowls, which is like, like there's restaurants here that's like Japanese / Thai restaurant, right?
Oh, sure.
I'm not sure like why that specific combination, but they serve Chinese food and poke bowls. So I thought, it's too bad. I'll never taste that again. I guess the next best thing is the recipe in this book. So 4 weeks ago, it was October 23rd. I remember it because that was the day before the book launched. And I was in Seattle for a book event there. And I had nothing going on the morning. It was until the book event was at night. And I just decided on a whim, I'm going to look up Green Valley. I'm going to look at the menu. And I looked it up, and there was sure enough, it says cold sesame noodles on there. And I'm like, wait a second. Why is this still there? So I had nothing better to do. I decided I'm just going to take an Uber down to Kent, Washington, to Green Valley Restaurant and try this, right? I show up there, and I taste it, and it was exactly as I tasted. I meet the new owner, okay? And the owner, her name is Melissa Liu. Her dad was the chef who cooked at Green Village for 40 years. And she said the reason why she decided to keep this restaurant is to keep her family name alive, to keep her father's recipes alive, right? And then I asked her, well, have you heard of America's Test Kitchen? She said, oh yeah, I've been watching it for 20 years. And I said, well, I have this book, and inside this book, I mentioned your restaurant and I mentioned your noodles. And she was completely just like, I think she got emotional over that, right? And so it was somewhat ironic that her keeping her father's recipes and name alive, and then this book, which suddenly her restaurant is in this book as well too. It was like kismet. But anyway, Green Valley, the Chinese food, Ken, Washington, it's really fantastic. And my homage to it is in this book.
Awesome. Take some questions from you.
That's a really good question. The question was that, it is based on our taste and memory, and how much of it is about if the other test cooks, how much of a say in this. At the end of the day, we are looking for maximal deliciousness, right? If something doesn't quite like for example, the sesame noodles, I wanted it to taste a certain way. And so I asked, can we have a little bit more Chinese black vinegar in this and perhaps a little less sesame paste? There were dishes like that. But I also know that this is very much a collaborative process, and there were 12 different cooks. And most of the time we were seeking for maximal deliciousness. And so I don't think we can be, it would not be right for me to say like, it's got to be this way, and I can't be so like, stubborn about this, but really, if there's a tiebreaker, it's which one's more delicious. That's one we want to go for.
You should have added those words to the title, maximal deliciousness.
Maximal,
there's already a lot of words in the title.
You could have sold a few more books, Josh.
I'll write it on there. Anybody else?
Yes. It was on Netflix. It was on there for 4 years, and it's going to go back on Amazon Prime, I believe, in December. So it's going to be, or so it should be this upcoming month. But it's a documentary about a chef named Curtis Duffy, and he ran a restaurant in Chicago for a number of years called Grace, and I followed him for for several years. And the documentary was on Netflix since 2016 and came off around 2020.
And it's great. Oh yeah.
It will be it's going to come back on other streaming platforms in the next month or so. But thank you so much for asking. I appreciate that. Sure, of course. My favorite Chinese restaurant in Chicago. Do any of you make it down to Chicago often? Okay. I'm going to name 3 places, if that's okay. Is that okay if I cheated and asked 3? Okay. The first one is called Jade Court. It's in Hyde Park. Jade Court is, it's when I think of a Cantonese restaurant that does, say, like ginger scallion lobster, that does a really good like fried rice, that does good char siu, right? I imagine Jade Court in my mind, and it's fantastic. Okay. The second place is called Shanghai Terrace. Shanghai Terrace is at the Peninsula Hotel. It is super expensive, but to me, it is fine dining Chinese. And I think there's not a lot of places in America where you can have Michelin level fine dining luxury Chinese. Once you have it, you're going to realize it is as sophisticated and delicious as I think any Michelin star restaurant in France or in Paris. Okay. And then the third place is going to be a little bit surprising, but it's called Chef's Special Cocktail Bar. Okay. You might think Chef's Special Cocktail Bar, right? It is run by, so here is the, I should give some context. Okay. It is opened by 2 white guys in July of 2020. Okay. Just remember like the context of that time there, right? Opening an American Chinese restaurant back then. Okay. And then I went there and I tasted the food and I was completely blown away. And subsequently, I believe the Chicago Tribune food critic, who's also Chinese American, went there and gave it a really great review too. And what I love about this place is what they're doing is they are executing American Chinese food like honey walnut shrimp, like egg rolls in the highest level possible, without any pretensions, without shaved truffles, nothing like that. They do the single best egg roll I have ever tasted. And I tried to pry that recipe from them in this book. They said no, and I'm not mad at them, but I replicated that recipe in this book, and it took me about 17 batches to get right. I will tell you very briefly the secret of what they told me. Most egg roll recipes, they'll take pork and shrimp and vegetables, they'll pre-cook it, then they'll roll it up and then they'll fry it. Okay. And sometimes I find the meat, when you cook it that way, when you pre-cook it, it becomes kind of pebbly. Ground pork can be that way too. So what these guys do is they whip the meat in the way that it's like if you ever make meatballs and you put it in like a paddle mixer, it releases what are called mycins, which gives it that very kind of like bouncy, toothsome feel to it, like really, really good meatloaf. And so what they do is they basically make shumai filling. They take pork, they add fat, lard, and shrimp, and they whip it until the meat is like Snow White, and like pink, like Snow White and pink, right? And they would cook the egg rolls with the filling from raw, and it is the juiciest, most delicious and flavorful filling. And again, it's in the book, so if you want to get it, you can pick one up at the counter. So those would be the 3 places.
Yeah.
Jade Court, Shanghai Terrace at the Peninsula Hotel, and Chef's Special Cocktail Bar. Those are right now my 3 favorite Chinese places in Chicago.
Well, it's like a tour of Chicago.
There you go. Of course.
Without even going near Chinatown.
Yeah. I think I saw a question over there, right? Okay. Hi. Yeah. I told them I would like that to be the cover, and they said yes. I mean, it's really as simple as that. I think, and I think America's Test Kitchen, for a long time, we have this very people have this very like specific, perhaps New England view of the food, right? And I think, to their credit, we've done a lot of things in the last few years to really, sort of expand our horizons of what ATK food is, right? Next year, we got a fantastic book. I hope they're going to come back a year from now called I think it's called When Southern Women Cook. And it's a celebration of female Southern chefs. And it's unlike any book that we do. We interview a lot of, Southern female chefs, and it's this beautiful book, a lot of great Southern cooking. And so it's sort of a new age at America's Test Kitchen, and we're much more we've expanded our horizons of what America's Test Kitchen food can be.
I think we have time for one more. You were
Dim sum in Chicago. Okay. Really quickly, Minghin, Minghin is fantastic. And Phoenix is a classic. They're both in Chinatown. They're both fantastic. Minghin and Phoenix are my two favorite dim sum places. So,
all right. You're going to sign books, yeah?
I will sign books. So first of all, again, I want to thank all of you for coming here. This is the last event. And so I'm really, really pleased and delighted that all you came out here at 13 degrees here. I want to thank my friend Josh, who hired me. And then, really, I owe a lot to you, and I really thank you for doing that. And I want to, again, thank the folks at Boswell Books here.
Yes.
Please, can you give a hand to the folks at Boswell Books? And what a fantastic bookstore. Thank you to Chris. Thank you to Daniel. And I'm going to end, because I told that I've been doing this enough, but I would like to just, if you can all wave and say hello. Hi, everyone. Hi, Milwaukee. Hi, Boswell Books. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for coming out here. All right. That's it. Thank you so much. Thanks for coming out, everyone.
Thanks.